So, you're playing Dragon Quest Monsters 2 on your Game Boy Color, and you're trying to figure out a good party for the end of game and the post game that comes afterwards. Well, this list will show you 11 pretty much unique monsters to that game and its remakes that you can use in order to have a very unique and interesting experience. These guys would generally be considered rank A and up in our modern Dragon Quest Monsters games. So if we were to use the Dark Princess scale, it would pretty much be A ranks, S ranks, and X ranks. However, although these could be really good bosses, not all of them are members of the Mystery family. However, some of them are. Now, that ambiguous intro out of the way, welcome everybody, and this is Defeater of Souls, and today we're going to be looking at these 11 unique monsters. And I think a good place to start would be the weakest monster in this video, Axe Shark. Axe Shark is kind of a funny monster, as he's just a shark with arms and legs and an axe. Really, it's all in the name, and it almost feels like something that would be part of a bad Hollywood movie. Now, of course, Axe Shark has a lot of weaknesses, but this could probably be explained due to how weaknesses work in Dragon Quest Monsters. It doesn't work like Pokemon, where it's just a glorified game of rock, paper, scissors, but rather they just have some moves deal more damage, and it's hardly anything worth note. However, it's just something that you want to try and do is aim for weaknesses, but you're never going to be directly told what those weaknesses are. You're just going to be able to look at the numbers and figure out what works best. And this is kind of how it works in most RPGs, so the fact that it carries over to this works out pretty well. Now that out of the way, it doesn't change the fact that Axe Shark's weaknesses are plentiful, to say the least. However, he has some good skills, as in he learns Sap, Selflessness, and Multi-Slice. Sap is as you might know, is a very good way to reduce enemy defense. Multi-Slice is a powerful physical attack, and Selflessness allows him to take some hits for his allies. As a result, Axe Shark's main base focus is to be a powerful physical attacker capable of taking some hits if needed. However, since this is Dragon Quest Monsters, it's important to note that what these guys learn naturally is not necessarily all they're capable of doing. They can do plenty more if they put their minds to it. The next guy we'll be talking about is one that actually isn't unique to Dragon Quest Monsters 2, and that's the Dirantula. He actually appears in Joker 2, as an A-rank monster with emphasis on ice and dark magic. However, that doesn't stop his appearance from Dragon Quest Monsters 2 from being the original one. In this one, he learns a much wider selection of skills, those being Bi-Attack, Lightning, and Poison Gas, allowing him to fill any niche that you might need. He also looks really cool, but has standard weaknesses and resistances. Now, of course, I said he was the only one not unique to another game, but that may have been a lie. See, another monster called Yggdrasil also appears in Joker 2, however, he only appears in the professional version. He has an emphasis on healing, and is also an A-rank monster. Something else he has in the original game is Sleep, Blowback, and Zing, which also helps with his support/healing role. And although he shares a name with a very common plot device in most Dragon Quest mainline games, he has practically nothing to do with any of those. Now let's move aside from those losers and let's move on to somebody who is very interesting and actually is completely unique, the Lazumanus. This guy is weak to pretty much every status condition with only one or two exceptions. However, he generally has some unique skills in order to help support your party. Those are mostly Absorb Magic, Kerplunk Dance, and Death Dance. This is a very interesting set of skills, because based off these moves alone, it doesn't seem like he's going to be doing a whole lot. He's going to attempt to instant kill the enemies, and then he's going to use Absorb Magic to make sure he has enough MP to bring everyone back when they die. However, this funky little lad has a very interesting name, as Lazumanus is basically a mix of Lazarus, which is a person from the Bible who was brought back from the dead by Jesus, and Manus, which may or may not be a play on the word mania or maniacs, which would basically mean someone who has a desperate obsession with something. So if you put them together, it could be read as someone who has a desperate obsession to remain alive, or to come back from the dead, which would explain his undead appearance. As for why he's holding his head, generally the bestiary points that it's because it has a chance to fall off. Now let's move away from our skeleton and move on to somebody a little more interesting, Orlegon. This is probably the strongest dragon in the original Dragon Quest Monsters 2 game, which is kind of funny because he doesn't appear in anything else. His main moves allow him to raise his defense using strong defense, but he's also capable of raising his attack using double up, making his skill set seem purely supportive, and once again, he's a pretty good tank. I think it's rather interesting that a lot of these monsters actually make pretty good tanks or support, which could also explain why they didn't come back, because of this very weird niche that they end up filling, being easily filled by other monsters that are introduced in some of the later games. However, he is very resistant. Now, he's not immune to everything like a gold slime would be, but he does resist most elements and most status conditions. The only exception is the fact that he has a weakness to ice. However, I guess that's something that Pokemon did get right, and that dragons are indeed weak to ice. Now, of course, there's one more monster here before we move up to the people on the top of the screen, and that's the Dark Mate. I have no idea what this is. It kinda looks like a plate, but really, I can't find anything that's supposed to tell me what this circle is. What it does have, however, is a unique selection of skills. By that, I mean it has Spooky Aura, Whack, and Lightning Storm. That makes him, I guess, a magical based tank. He has resistances, maybe not on the same level as the Orlegon, but they are present, and he also has very high defense. Maybe not the highest defense as like a gold slime or a metal slime, but the defense is high. So he's pretty much another magical based tank, except he can spin. Or at least that's all the bestiary description gives us of him in order to tell us what he does. Now anyway, let's move on to the people that we're actually here for. These are the new final bosses. Now what do I mean by that? Well, all 4 of these were extra final forms given to the final bosses of the first 4 Dragon Quest games. So let's start with the original and take a look at Lord Draco. Now the reason why he's called Lord Draco is because in the original Game Boy games he's called Draco Lord, so it swaps it around to make something new. Lord Draco looks absolutely insane, and generally everything seems to support the fact that Dragon Lord's gone crazy. He's also referred to as Neo Dragon Lord, but we're gonna keep referring him to as Lord Draco. He's immune to every single status condition, and he learns Lightning Magic, Lightning Storm, and Bolt, which makes it seem like he should be a powerful magic attacker with emphasis on lightning. However, funnily enough, he actually has a weakness, and this weakness is to lightning. It's weird how these things end up going full circle. Another unique and fairly interesting monster that's an evolution from the second and final boss of these games is Genocido, also known as Geno Malroth. I actually find this name incredibly clever because it's a play off of his localized name in the Game Boy games, Cydo. By adding Geno in front, you get the word Genocido, which is based off the word genocide, which is kind of Malroth's whole deal. Anyways, he learns fairly powerful physical attacks, or other based attacks such as Pearly Gates and Winsicles, and he also learns Insulate just because he can. He's also immune to all status conditions, and this is something that pretty much all these final boss evolutions are gonna have. However, unlike Lord Draco, he has more weaknesses, those being Fire Breath, Ice Breath, Lightning, Wind, Explosions, and Magic Bursts. As a result, he is not the strongest, but he does, however, have one thing going for him that Lord Draco does not, and that's the fact that Genocido is basically the top of his chain. That means there's nothing that requires Genocido in order to be bred. Meaning once you have a Genocido, you've basically gotten the highest point you can, something that very few monsters can say. Now, of course, there are other weaker monsters that are at the top of their chain, but I still thought it was interesting to bring up. Here's another fun one, Asura Zoma. Now, of course, this is a transformation of the Dark Lord from Dragon Quest III Zoma, and he has a very balanced skill set, as in he has Fire Breath, Giga Slash, and Focus. He is also immune to every status condition, and he's also immune to quite a few elements. He has no real notable weaknesses, and he's also one of the few guys whose name doesn't change when you go from the Game Boy games to a mainline game, or basic translation. The final guy, which is a transformation from the final boss of the Pizarro the Manslayer, would be the Psycho Pizarro from Dragon Quest IV. Now, of course, he has really high stats, especially compared to the other 3. His stats are surprisingly even higher. However, as a cost for this, he is weak to almost every single element, with the exceptions being crack, water, and rocks and physical attacks for some reason. He learns a pretty interesting selection of moves such as Big Banga, Disruptive Wave, and Ice Breath. However, I think something real interesting about him is how he's technically a mix of S-Stark and Pizarro. For those who've played Dragon Quest IV or have at least seen the final battle, in the final battle, S-Stark Pizarro starts off looking like S-Stark before slowly transforming into the Pizarro, which is generally associated with that final form. However, this takes that final Pizarro, and then takes S-Stark, turns him into armor, and throws it back on top, while coloring it pink. It's a fairly interesting color, but at the same time, I don't think I really like how Psycho Pizarro looks. One last thing before we move on from these four is that technically, in Dragon Quest Monsters Super Light, they all appear. However, pretty much every monster had appeared in Dragon Quest Monsters Super Light, but I'm not really able to take a look at this game on account of it being a Japanese mobile game that's been discontinued, like every other Square Enix game that's ever gonna exist. However, something else that I really meant to mention here was the fact that in this game, they all get evolutions. And really, there's no data on any of these guys, but I'm showing them on screen, and I think you can agree with me that most of these guys look really cool. Now, the final guy on this list is one that I've been meaning to talk about for a long time. This guy is Gorago. So, the thing about Gorago is he is technically considered the super boss of Dragon Quest Monsters 2, although not officially. Before we get into his super boss appearance though, let's talk about his main appearance, where he has Bang, Spooky Aura, and Frenzy, so technically he can do whatever he wants. He can do physical attacks with Frenzy, he can do magic attacks with Bang, and he can reduce magical resistance using Spooky Aura. However, his weaknesses and resistances are pretty standard, and nothing really worth noting. However, the super boss version is the one I really want to talk about here. In order to get him, you have to beat the game, and then after you beat the game, you have to do some of the post-game stuff. One of the post-game things you have to do is show the key collector in Dragon Quest Monsters 2 a monster that they have never seen before. In order to do this, you have to show them a Dragon Quest Monsters 2 exclusive monster, generally a boss monster. The easiest way to do this is to take the final boss, his egg that you get after you trade in enough mini-medals after you've beaten the game, and just show him that. However, you could also do any of the other four guys that I just previously mentioned. After you've shown him this, he gives you a key. This brings you to a tower which has multiple, somewhat challenging encounters. After you complete all those, it may seem like you have everything you need. However, you actually need to complete another tower. In order to access this tower, you must have a copy of the other Dragon Quest Monsters game. So if you are playing on Kobe's adventure, you need one of Terra's adventure, and vice versa. After all, these guys both have separate towers. And basically, after you've completed both towers, which would require you to trade keys, meaning you need a way to do that as well, then you'd be able to climb the Soul Tower and be able to fight Gorago at the very top. And this boss, he's generally probably the hardest boss in the game. I have actually been so close to actually being able to fight him myself to test this, but based off what I am able to figure out, he seems like he should be enough of a challenge. He has the strongest form of Fire Breath, along with Disruptive Wave, Warcry, and Meditate in order to heal himself, so it sounds like it should be a fun, unique encounter. However, once again, I don't really have much to work off of here, but I do think it's interesting how he is a super boss that pretty much nobody knows about, and nobody really takes the time to acknowledge. So there were 11 unique monsters that appeared in Dragon Quest Monsters 2. Do you think that there's any that I probably should have brought up that maybe just weren't strong enough for this particular video? Let me know down in the comments. Dragon Quest Monsters has so many unique monsters, and honestly, making videos for them all would probably take forever, which is why I'm going to be doing that over the course of these videos that I upload. However, that's not going to be the next video I do because I don't know what that one is. It's also around Christmas, so if you celebrate that, Merry Christmas as well. That's pretty much all I have to say, so please, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like it, and if you enjoyed my Dragon Quest Monsters exclusive content, to subscribe to my channel, because it really helps a lot. The goal is to hit 100 subscribers by the end of the year, and I'm really only 5 away. I mean, small goals, small steps, right? We're almost there. So, thank you for watching, and this has been Defeater of Souls.